Well, here we go again. Boris Johnson will make another attempt today to try and force a general election in December as part of his plan to deliver Brexit. Last night, he failed to win enough support from MPs. He wanted it to be December the 12th. Now, he'll also have a further go by a slightly different route today. He's publishing a bill that would only need a simple majority to succeed, not 2/3 as required in previous votes. But he doesn't have a Commons majority. He still needs some opposition MPs to back him. And Jeremy Corbyn is not committing just yet.
We will obviously look and scrutinise that bill, and we look forward to a clear, definitive decision that no deal is absolutely off the table.
Boris Johnson would argue that that has in fact been done. But the Liberal Democrats are also not happy. They want an election on the 9th of December. Now, it may only be 3 days earlier, but there is a reason for it. And the party's leader, Jo Swinson, remains reserved about backing Boris Johnson's timetable of the 12th.
I don't trust Boris Johnson, and I don't trust the leader of the opposition either. Any possibility that they could band together and try and force a Brexit deal through, we cannot allow that risk. So we will be looking very carefully at this bill when it's published. We will be discussing with other parties too.
Well, the reason for that, the only reason I've been able to make out for the difference between the 12th and the 9th is that some people are complaining that it's going to be dark and cold on the 12th, which it also will be on the 9th, but also that university students will not have finished their term or will have finished their term by the 12th, which will disenfranchise them from their votes, because if they're voted and registered to vote in the place of their university, they would lose that vote if it was on the 12th, but not on the 9th. That's what I've been able to conclude. So if you've been wondering about that. Well, Jennifer McKernan is the editor of the political blog Genesis News and joins me now. A very good morning to you.
Hi, Patrick. Hi. How are you doing?
Good morning. Now, is that the only reason that there's this 3-day argument going on?
It's an important reason, towards the end of it, but also we need to look at the start of that time. So what they're trying to do by punting it 3 days earlier is actually shorten the length of time available now for Boris Johnson to be messing around and perhaps bringing forward that withdrawal bill, even though he said he won't, that there is still scope for him to do that. He's broken pledges before. So the real reason, on top of the idea of disenfranchising students, is actually to limit the amount of time available before Parliament would rise for any kind of general election.
But it's also an important point, isn't it, for Labour particularly, who believe that they have purchase with the students?
Oh, yes, yeah. And then Jeremy Corbyn was saying last night that he also doesn't want to disenfranchise students. And of course not, because, a significant bulk of students would probably be more likely to vote for Labour or the Lib Dems or the SNP than for the Tories. So it is an important point for the opposition parties to be making, that they know who their voters are.
Now, to hear Jo Swinson stand up there and say, I don't trust any of them. I don't trust. It is getting quite, I don't know, forthright, isn't it? There's words being spoken and being said in phrases that you wouldn't have heard a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's all very difficult. I mean, I've been looking back. Obviously, we're getting towards the end of the year. I've been looking back towards the start of the year and the way that even Theresa May was being called a liar in the chamber by the SNP leader. There's been a real breakdown of communication. We know this, and in some ways, it has been encouraged by Boris Johnson's government. We heard Jess Phillips come forward and say, "Look, we all know that you're pursuing a strategy to try and divide the country. Instead of healing any divisions over Brexit, the use of language such as treason and traitors and betrayal and surrender, it all ties into this narrative that for the general election the Tories want to push, that is going to be it's the people versus Parliament narrative, and I think that is quite dangerous.
Now, although Boris Johnson does make it onto the front page of the Telegraph this morning, not much really being said about his do or die, get me out by the 31st of October, because that is not happening now.
No, what a shame. Boris Johnson obviously pledged that he would rather be dead in a ditch than not leave.
Well, he was accused, I think, by Jeremy Corbyn of not being dead in a ditch, of failing to be dead in a ditch.
Yes, unclear if that was actually a joke or not.
No, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. He's not given to many jokes, Mr. Corbyn, so maybe it
no.
Who knows?
Yeah, so Boris Johnson, obviously, the polls are showing, some of the polls, not all of them, some polls are showing that the Tories have a massive majority right now, but missing that 31st of October deadline, breaking that promise, will probably hit Boris Johnson's
Will it,
Conservative
though?
Party quite
Because
hard.
a lot of the electorate, when asked, said that they wouldn't blame him if it wasn't met, that he'd done his best, and that they would more likely to blame people like Jeremy Corbyn and Jo Swinson.
Sure, that is definitely the view of some people. But what we're looking at with people who want the UK to leave the EU, your Leave voters are split, and the Conservatives are desperate to hold on to Leave voters who have come back to the party since Boris Johnson was elected. But the risk is that they splinter off and go back to the Brexit party, Nigel Farage's Brexit party. So that's what they're trying to avoid.
Will he succeed, do you think, in getting this election? He thinks it's in his interest to do it now. Jeremy Corbyn, it would appear, would prefer he did it after Brexit had happened, or at least those cohorts around him are suggesting that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're on a 90% failure rate at the moment for Boris Johnson's plans.
Not good.
But it does seem likely. It seems more likely than not, because at the moment what we've got is the Lib Dems and the SNP sort of banding together, and potentially the DUP could join on as well. It all depends on this date. So perhaps there's scope for the government to amend their notwithstanding vote and change that date to the 9th rather than the 12th of December, and that would get everybody on board.
But he still needs a fair few Labour MPs to support this, and they're being whipped to not support it. Unless Jeremy Corbyn changed his mind.
I don't think Jeremy Corbyn is going to change his mind because as much as he says this is all about avoiding a no deal, we have all also seen the polls that are pretty dire for Labour. So it's quite clear that Labour really needs to see a distinct improvement in that before they go for an election in an ideal world. But yeah, I mean, Jeremy Corbyn, a serial rebel himself, does not have as much control as he might like over his own MPs who will defy the whip. We know that. We've seen it before.
Good to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed. Jennifer McKernan there, who's editor of Genesis News. You're listening to BBC Radio London. Let's catch up to date now with your latest travel and